Woe is me. Edmondo and Salvatore lived as neighbors in a small farming town, years before the advent of radio. This town had served as Edmondo's home for all his life. In 30 years, he had never traveled more than 2 miles outside it. Salvatore was something of a newcomer, having just moved in from Genoa only a few weeks before. Nothing delighted the inhabitants of this town quite so much as gossip. Rumor was their wellspring of joy, but their town was somewhat out of the way, and it was a rare pleasure when news of the outside world reached their ears. Most of the time, they could only chat about what was going on in their own community. It was hard to say what it was about Edmondo that the other townsfolk found so curious and compelling. At first blush, one saw only a long string of averages. His looks were nice enough, but he wasn't handsome. He was decent, but not virtuous, not poor nor rich, not smart nor dumb, not lazy, but not exactly industrious either. Perhaps it was the fact that Edmondo was one of the few people in the town who didn't care for gossip. He wasn't unfriendly, but he preferred to keep his business to himself and didn't pry into the business of others. Paradoxically, whenever something did happen to him, it was all the more interesting to the gossipers when they gathered to talk at the bar. "Did you hear the latest?" a young tailor asked his fellows one evening. "Edmondo had a fire in his house." The rest of them gathered close, pressing for details. "Edmondo's wife, Gianna, told me the story," the tailor reported. "You know how Edmondo likes to smoke his pipe, right? Well, apparently he wasn't watching where his ashes fell, and they caught on his blanket. Half of the house went up before they could put out the blaze. They bought new clothes for me, but they're also going to have to buy a new bed and build a new wall and roof." The others shook their heads. "Bad thing to happen," said the town preacher. "Poor Edmondo," sighed the shoemaker. To the tailor's side, someone snorted loudly. It was Salvatore, sitting the next table over. "Poor Edmondo," Salvatore scoffed. "He got off lucky. When I was in Genoa, not only did my entire house go up in smoke, the fire also claimed my crops, my barn, and all the animals inside it. All my goats burned to death." "Oh," cried the fisherman, the others looking on him with a mixture of grievous pity and eagerness. "I'm so sorry to hear it, Salvatore. Tell us what happened." "It was dreadful," Salvatore sighed. For the next week the talk was all about Salvatore. Wherever he went, passers-by offered their condolences and pumped him for details about his tragedy, which he was always happy to provide. A few considerate souls also thought to see Edmondo, who smiled and said, "We're fine. We're going to make it through." 2 weeks had passed when Edmondo's life took a new and startling turn. Marcella, an older cousin of Edmondo's, stumbled out from a rainstorm into a gaggle of gossipers at the bar. "You're not going to believe this," the old woman said. "You know, Gianna, my cousin Edmondo's wife, he came home from the market to find that tawdry tart kissing Lucio Conte." "No," breathed the preacher. "Which one is Lucio Conte?" asked the shoemaker. "The one who paints," the preacher reminded. "Oh, him," said the shoemaker. "Go on." "Well, Lucio took off at once, and for all I know, Gianna and Edmondo are still screaming at each other." "What a rotten thing to come home to," the preacher clucked. "Please," snapped Salvatore, who had become firmly established as one of the best gossipers in the community. "You act as though no wife has ever kissed another man. You haven't seen unfaithfulness the way I have." Salvatore's lip quivered. "My dear, sweet Claudina," he said in a hushed voice, "for 5 years in Genoa, we were husband and wife until one day I come home to find her not only with my best friend, but also my nephew and 2 of my oldest farmhands." Tears spilled from Salvatore's eyes. Then she tells me, laughing, that she's been seeing other men behind my back since I first proposed to her, and she did it all because she hated me and thought I was ugly. The town couldn't get enough of Salvatore's old scandal. They picked over all the details as Salvatore moaned bitterly over lost love. Meanwhile, things were not going well for Edmondo. Gianna was still living with him, but there was no warmth between them anymore. What was more startling was that Edmondo's health had taken a turn for the worse. No matter how warmly he dressed, his body was always shaking with chills, and he would hock up phlegm the color of old rust. For the next few weeks, the community watched him struggling back and forth from his house to the hospital, until finally Gianna announced miserably that pneumonia had claimed Edmondo's life. They bore his body to the church and set him in a coffin. Practically everyone in town came to pay their last respects. "It was horrible," said Gianna at the wake. "He didn't go peacefully." "How did he get it?" asked the preacher. "He ran out into the storm the night that we fought," Gianna explained. "We thought that it was just a cold at first, but he was having pains in his chest and his body just never cooled down. The worst of it was that he seemed to be losing his mind, talking nonsense until he was babbling the way you do to a baby." The preacher hung his head. "What a horrifying way to go. I'd give up a mountain of gold not to catch anything like his pneumonia." "His pneumonia!" Salvatore cried. Many people wheeled around to stare at him. "What about my pneumonia? The pains in my chest were so agonizing it was like a family of rats chewing away from the inside. My body was so hot that the blood in my veins boiled like a pot of soup. But I was so cold that I felt like a corpse at the bottom of the sea. I was so crazy with the pain, I thought I was a sparrow. I threw myself off the roof, twittering and chirping, thinking I could fly. Mine was 10 times worse." In the pause that followed, several dozen sets of eyes either narrowed very coldly or widened in absolute incredulity. "And I suppose your pneumonia was so unbelievably bad that it brought you right back to life after it killed you, so you could whine about how very tragic it was?" asked Gianna. "Come on, then, Salvatore," someone else challenged. "Make us feel sorry for you." Salvatore's mouth worked itself into all sorts of expressions and shapes, but nothing of any consequence came out. Moral: don't make yourself into a victim.